Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Horner, the Ingram Director of Education at the Carlos Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, the 30th Annual Nix Mann Endowed Lecture. 3 decades ago, Louis Nix and Henry Mann and their architectural firm Nix Mann and Associates, now Perkins and Will, initiated the Carlos Museum's very first endowment fund, ensuring that the museum would be able to welcome distinguished scholars, artists, and writers to campus each and every year. We are grateful for Louis and Henry's vision and for their understanding of the power of endowment to strengthen and grow an institution. We are also grateful that others have followed their example. Friends and family of museum patron Dr. John Laszlo endowed the Laszlo Excalibur Lecture, which is dedicated to the classical world in his honor. Museum docent Lynn Kirkland endowed the Grace W. Blanton Lecture Fund in honor of her mother to support lectures related to the art and culture of the Americas. And on the occasion of curator Peter Lacavara's retirement from the Carlos, museum patrons joined together to create the Lacavara Lecture Fund to support programs related to ancient Egypt. These endowments have brought remarkable voices to campus, including eminent art historians, poets Alice Oswald and Anne Carson, authors Isabel Wilkerson, Margaret Atwood, and Daniel Mendelsohn, and remarkable contemporary artists like today's speaker, Laeïla Adjovi. On behalf of the entire Carlos Museum staff, I thank all of you for your steadfast support. And now it is my pleasure to turn the Zoom podium over to Dr. Amanda Hillman, curator of the extraordinary exhibition, And I Must Scream, to introduce today's speaker, Laeïla Adjovi.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you all for coming to this afternoon's lecture. We are sorry it's not in person, but glad that we can still connect digitally. And indeed, this access has made it truly global. I see some listeners from Missouri and England, in addition to our crowd from right here in Georgia. I'm pleased to present Laeïla Adjovi as our featured speaker today. Laeïla is a journalist, photographer, documentary filmmaker, artist, but ultimately, Laeïla describes herself as a storyteller and uses these modes and media to express meaning within the daily lives of people from across Africa and all over the world. While her passports proclaim her to be Beninese and French, her experience would really suggest she's a child of the world, which gives her intimate access to her subjects, whether they be of Gelede and Efe societies in Benin, or from New Caledonia, or among the devotees of Yamoja in Cuba, as we will hear about today. From her base in Dakar, and where she is today, she photographed her series Malaika Dotou Sankofa with French photographer Louis Coquet in the rundown Palais du Justice, a now familiar site of art in the city, thanks to the 2016 Dakar Biennale. The series won the Leopold Senghor Prize at Dakar in 2018, the highest prize awarded during the festival. For me, in this exhibition that seeks to examine the connections of different man-made systems of oppression, corruption, human rights violations, displacement, and environmental destruction, Laeila and Louis captivatingly captures this in their series that visualizes the destiny of embodied Africa to burst the seams of the suit that contains her. After Laeila's talk, I will field questions, so please put them in the Q&A, and please help me welcome Laeïla Adjovi.
Hi, thank you so much for this introduction, Amanda, and thank you, Elizabeth, for having me here, giving the Nix Mann lecture today. I'm going to start this conversation, and feel free to ask any question during the talk as well. I'm going to start this conversation by reading the poem. That goes with the series. The series Malaika Dotou Sankofa is a visual tale that stems from this poem that I wrote in 2016, and I believe that it's being exhibited with the series as part of the exhibition. My name is Malaika Dotou Sankofa. I don't know how long I've been kept here. I was told it was for my own good to never try to escape, that the skies would be all gloom, storm, squalls, and night. So I stayed, but now freedom feels just a dream away. My name is Malaika. I'm not trying to be the center of the world, only my own. I'm being told to develop, take off, emerge, grow, all without stepping out of the box, force-fed with empty concepts, watermelon and fried chicken. So I started a hunger strike. I hear revolution rumble in my empty stomach. My name is Dotou. This drab old suit is my sole attire, one uniform, impossible to refute. Fortunately, seams are bursting. I've learned to sew. I'm no longer afraid to outgrow it and patch up my own suit. My name is Sankofa. In my cell, in myself, I've learned to tame words and letters without ever betraying the tongue. I can read through history book stains and write on typewriters nested in barbed wire. From now on, no one can turn off my lights. I will dance high on the ruins of yesterday, on the tombs of plunderers, in the graveyards of their cliches. My name is Malaika Dotou Sankofa. As I was taking a sabbatical from my work as a reporter, I wrote this poem. I was reading Afrotopia from Senegalese author and poet Felwine Sarr. I believe it was just translated into English, and its American editor describes it as a vibrant meditation and poetic call for an African utopian philosophy and self-reinvention. I've known the work of Felwine Sarr, a Senegalese scholar, poet, writer, and musician for quite some time now. And he's writing, among others, from, for example, Souleymane Bachir Ndiaye, Achille Mbembe, or Haitian author Jean-Claude Charles, and particularly his essay on the Black body. All those writings were a great source of inspiration and very nourishing reads in this time that I was taking off my work as a reporter. So I wrote this poem, and I wanted to illustrate it with a visual tale, as photography being my medium of choice. I wrote this and I started to frantically make feathers. I think that any creative impulse starts with an itch, a recurring thought, strange dreams, an itch that's so far inside that you cannot scratch it. And so it becomes an obsession, a neurosis, an idea that colonizes your mind. In this case, it was a winged creature named Malaika. Malaika means angel in the Swahili language of Eastern Africa. Malaka is the name for angel in the Wolof language of Senegal. Dotou means stay strong and determined in the Fon language of Benin. I'm from the Republic of Benin. And Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol. So it's a pictogram from Ghana, pictured as a messenger bird flying with its head turned backwards. Sankofa means return and get it, or learn from the past. Malaika had to be a Black woman, of course, but an androgynous character. I just did not want to feed into the constant objectification of the Black female body, so I didn't want anything to be too feminine or sexy. So I imagined that suit, and as usual, I started doing sketches and using film photography to record the first fittings. It's important for me that it's analog photography and that it's film photography, because I've been thinking about photography, and I've been a photographer for a while now, and I would want my archive, the archive that remains of my work, to be film and contact sheets and not just pixels. I think of photography as artisan work, as a craftsmanship, where raw material is time, light, and life itself, and sometimes death. The wings were made heavy and wide, a metaphor for African identity. I made the feathers as a Ndiakhas pattern. The fabric that's used as clothing for the Baifal community here. And then we found a setting. My collaborator in the series, Louis Coquet, found the perfect spot, in the basement of an abandoned tribunal. We could still access the cells where the perpetrators were kept before being tried. We also found books and props for the shooting on site. We didn't know that at the time, that same courthouse would then become renovated and would host the Art Biennial of Dakar, which is one of the main centers for contemporary arts on the continent. So the work made its way. We managed to finish the wings, we shot, and the series was exhibited in that same old courthouse during the biennial. With this work, we wanted to give life to a creature that would express the idea of breaking free. Malaika tells us that when we Africans rise, and indeed we are, it needs to be on our own terms. And before that happens, there will be obstruction and destruction. The series was exhibited in France, in the UK, in the United States, in South Africa, in Senegal, Benin, in Cuba. I often say that it's the equivalent of a group of friends making music in their garage and then being overwhelmed by the success of a first album. This picture, Malaika number 4, for this picture, I was told that we had made iconic work, prints were sold, it entered public collections of museums, and it's often the one that's favored by collectors, but it's not my favorite. My personal favorite is this one. The stairs are right there on the left of the image, but somehow Malaika still felt that this wall had to be broken. At this point in my artistic practice, I didn't know that this character and the metaphor of flight for breaking free would follow me in my next project. This is the strip of a graphic novel that I really love. It's by Brazilian illustrator Marcelo Salete, and it's about the life of maroon slaves in a community that existed in Brazil during during slavery. So this maroon community managed to stay and preserve their way of life. And although it was confronted with attacks from plantation owners, in this book and in others, I learned about the mythology of flying Africans. As an artist, it takes a long time to realize why we do what we do. The secret intention behind an artistic impulse, the wider meaning and the bigger picture. How the different artworks are connected in a web that we can't see, and how things just make sense after the fact. I started to work on a project about rights of an African deity and how the rights transformed when they arrived in Cuba. I started working on Yemoja, also called Mamiwata or Aflekete, as I wanted to address the themes of cultural resistance and examine how African spiritualities survived the Middle Passage and adapted in order to survive annihilation. It's while researching for this new project, while reading Toni Morrison and other Caribbean authors, that I found out about the myth of flying Africans, this myth about Black enslaved people that fled the plantation by taking off in the air. a myth that exists throughout the Americas and in the Caribbean. I found out later that flight is also a language for runaway slaves. The fact that I would explore those topics after making a series about breaking free with a winged creature kept me up at night at some point. But as I said, we don't always know why we do the things we do. Toni Morrison says in an interview that one thing that you can say about a myth, that there's some form of truth in it. My goal in this new project, The Road of Yemoja, is not to find out if indeed some humans managed to fly out of the plantation and thus escape slavery. Rather, to talk about all the forms of resistance that don't equate blood or war, and also explore how the word, the worship, and culture travel with us and within us, no matter what, and how that keeps us alive and human. There is a lot that was already said about how history and mythologies are kept in songs. And before starting the second part, that has to do with the traveling of word and chants and the Black Atlantic, I wanted to have just a short listening session to listen to a chant that was collected in Cuba. If my computer allows me to. A chant that was collected during a procession for Yemoja in the neighborhood of Regla in Havana, Cuba. Moyuba is a form of ritual praying that comes from the Yorubas. So this new project is set in Nigeria, Benin, and Cuba. It's at the crossroad. It's at the crossroad of photography, sound design, literature, and creative documentary. The Road of Yemoja examines how a West African deity, Yemoja, called Yemoja or Aflikete in Cuba, how this deity survived the Middle Passage to become venerated on both sides of the Atlantic. I collected chanting. I did some interviews with worshippers in the 3 countries, and I tried to put together a gallery of portraits, and with this material, try to reflect on on a culture that echoes from one shore to the other. I'm just going to tell you more about who is Yemoja before we move forward. So in Yoruba mythology, Yemoja is the Orisha, the deity of the ocean. Her rites traveled from the African coasts in what is called Yoruba land. Yoruba land, the Yorubas are an ethnic group and a language that spans across Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. And so this deity traveled to the Americas during the slave trade. And in Cuba, because of syncretism, Yemoja, Yemoja, became closely associated with and worshipped as the Virgin Mary. The importance of this heritage across the ocean is well known by Africans themselves, and especially practitioners of the traditional religion of the Ifa religion in Nigeria. Omitonade Ifawemimo Egbelade is a priestess she's one of the youngest priestesses of Yemoja in the Nigerian city of Ibadan. She's a woman of her time, addicted to social media and to her 2 smartphones, and educated with a degree in economics, and she's just a delightful and really bright young woman, and even showing all those signs of modernity, she still calls herself a traditionalist, because she chose to follow the path of Ifa religion and defend it. And she's very she was very happy to be able to hear some chanting, some of the chanting that remained the same from the other side of the ocean, from Cuba. And she talked a lot about the impact of colonization on local cultures. She talked a lot about the whitewashing of history, and how grateful she is that descendants of slaves have kept her faith alive. Because she says that it allows young people in Nigeria and across the continent to also go back to their roots, because seeing chanting to the Orishas and praying or using Ifa geomancy elsewhere in the first world, it gives value to a faith that was long scorned upon. So I'm very interested in how how culture is formed and transformed, and in Cuba, in order to be preserved, of course, Ifa spirituality had to evolve. As they were forced into Christianity, one strategy of the enslaved Africans was to use Catholic saints as shields. French anthropologist Roger Bastide describes this process as using black gods with white masks. Yoruba and Ewefon people could identify with the Christian God, could identify the Christian God with their own creator God, Olodumare, but they refused to abandon their deities that they considered messengers of the creator God sent to help mankind. To dodge the whip, Africans enslaved in Cuba had to hide their deities. So Yemoja was hidden behind the mask of the Virgin of Regla. Chongo, deity of lightning, fire, and thunder, hid behind the figure of Santa Barbara. Oshun, the deity of sensuality and creativity, was dressed up as the Virgin of Cobre. Ogun, lord of iron, became San Pedro, and so on. These African deities were so well disguised that within a few generations, Orisha and Vodouns, because Vodun is a term that refers to the same thing as Orisha, it's just a different language. So Vodun and Orisha were so well disguised in Cuba that they became called saints, santos in Cuba. And so Santeria soon emerged as a syncretic religious system that blended Yoruba religious practices with Spanish Catholicism and Spiritism. Meanwhile, in the arts, Cuban authors and poets claimed and owned this African heritage. For example, in this poem from Nicolas Guillen, he says that he's a Yoruba, that he cries in Yoruba, and when he's not Yoruba, he's Congo, he's Mandinga, he's Karabali, so all of the African origins of the people that were taken to be enslaved in Cuba. And by extension, some African scholars, and particularly one called Iyai Olabi, says that we should blow up academic codes and national borders in order to consider Nicolas Guillen and some of his counterparts as Yoruba poets who follow some of the codes of Yoruba oral literature. So it was important for me in this project to be able to connect some dots and retrace lines of a new cultural geography. In this project, I also wanted to display a reflection around light. As I said, it's the raw material of any photographer. And in the Roads of Yemoja, I use chiaroscuro to illustrate the African belief that in the dark lies an invisible world of ancestors and spirits here to support and guide us. The photographic series includes portraits, images of religious ceremonies and ritual objects presented as single images or triptychs. And it's a project that's articulated around the role of women and the importance of oral transmission. It's a project that I hope will offer new points of dialogue on cultural resistance, fragmented collective memory, and creolization. I think of art as a doorway into counter narratives, counter histories. And so I wanted to give a voice to worshippers of a religion that had been silenced and assemble new narratives around African spiritualities that would also shed light on the importance of oral archives. So this next soundbite is an extract of a piece called Voices of Worship. It's meant to show the cultural continuum between Nigeria, Benin, and Cuba, meant to show that African languages and chanting to the deity of the ocean remain the same and are still transmitted to this day on both sides of the Atlantic.
Olùyè ṣe ń gbóhùn mi ò Yemoja o yo. Olùyè ṣe ń gbóhùn mi ò Yemoja o yo. Àjogún ṣọgbà mi o ọlọ́yọ̀ o Yemoja o yo. Yemaya asesu Yemaya. Yemaya asesu, esa me gusta mucho, aunque mi Yemaya no es asesu. Asesu Yemaya, Yemaya asesu Yemaya, Yemaya olodo, olodo Yemaya, Yemaya olodo, olodo Yemaya. That's your song for Yemoja Asesu. Yemoja, the owner of River.
So, what I did here is basically I asked some of the worshippers to chant. I asked in Cuba this lady called Tomasa to chant, and she said that her favorite song to Yemaya was Yemaya Sesu. So I recorded her, and then I brought it back to Nigeria, to Omitonade, the priestess that I introduced you to. And the chants were the same. So we had a conversation about that, and she chanted her version of Yemoja Sesu. And I brought back that chanting to Tomasa, and it was met with great emotion. The fact that there was such a struggle to maintain and preserve the word, the chanting, the culture, and the fact that it was done with success, and that generations later, people are still holding on to that spirituality and those forms of culture. It's often met with great emotion on both sides when I have them listen, because it shows like that the umbilical cord is not really cut, and the chanting is one thing, but the drumming is also part of that heritage that was transmitted. So it's in the music, in the gestures, the body, and the body is where the memory was encapsulated, right? So the drum itself has also become a metaphor for the condition of Black people in Cuba, and some Cuban authors talk about that. They say that the drum are a metaphor for Black liberation that shows where the Black Afro-Cubans started in the schools of barracons, where the drums were supposed to be hidden or even buried, and then could come into the light, and Afro-Cuban drumming and music is now one of the pillars of Cuban culture. So there's, in this project, I talk about the Yoruba heritage, Yoruba drumming as well. And I also talk about the heritage of another West African people, the Ewefon. For example, this worshipper is a descendant of Arara slaves, so people that come from originate from a place called Alada or Dahomey in the pre-colonial geography of the continent. So some of the photography that I did is also about the heritage of the Ewefon in Cuba, and I mixed it with pictures that were taken in Ouida, a city, a former slave port that's now in Republic of Benin, which corresponds to the former Dahomey. And so I just wanted to show once again, the echoing of the culture, and also show how it spread. Because, for example, in Cuba, the Afro-Cuban, African religions, or Afro-Cuban religions, or religions of African origin that syncretized, as I said, are also have a large audience within the Cuban who are not direct descendant of slaves. For example, descendant of the Chinese indentured laborers that were taken to Cuba towards the mid of the 19th century. So I tell all of those stories in this piece, and I also want to share part of my bibliography, because I feel like as I opened my mind and explored ways to unlock my my artistic practice, I had to break boundaries between disciplines and to mobilize a corpus that comes from anthropology, history of religions, literature. And in doing that, I also had to grasp topics that relate to space and mobility. So I started the reflection on maps. A map is a result of knowledge that's accumulated at one point in time. It was a tool for exploration. It was greatly used by the first Portuguese navigators that were discovering the New World. For European sailors, of course, so it was also an instrument for exploitation, a tool for military attacks. And there's always a difference between the way that pre-colonial, those territories were represented in the pre-colonial era and their geography now. So that's what I wanted, that's that gap that I wanted to explore, and also show that within the map, is the fantasies and the imagined versions of the continent are drawn and entrenched in those documents. We can see that there are some imaginary animals and beings, the same ones that were attributed to our continents are depicted on the maps. So in my artistic journey, I wanted to also allow myself to create new archives. to reflect on maps that showed the gaps, the need to fill some of the blanks in history. For example, those maps that I showed you, these ones and those are from a book that's called Atlas of the Imaginary Worlds. So it was important for me to, yes, to reflect on trajectories, the mapping of our imaginations, and the work on a cartography that would show the movement of return that was filling the dreams of some of the African diasporas. This is one of the archives that I've been working on. It's about the loop of memory and about the importance of the great return to the motherland or the land of ancestors. So the importance of that tale or that reality within diasporic mythology. I tell that story and I talk about this movement and this return within the story of the Barrow family. In this project, The Roads of Yemoja, I met this family in Cuba. So Suilen, who is on this picture, is the last one to be initiated to a syncretized version of Vodun, which is called Regla Arara. And she knows the role of women in the transmission of African spirituality. It was very important in her family. She was initiated by her great-grandmother, and her great-grandmother was the daughter of Esteban Barotosu, who is an African that was taken in Benin to be enslaved in Cuba, and who managed to learn to read and write, which was very rare at the time, and to keep a trace of his African lineage. So with that, the descendants of Esteban Baró were able to go back to Benin and to find to find the exact location that they came from. They were able to do that because of the proof of lineage, but also because of some of the chanting that was transmitted within their family. I guess that, yes, this story, which is, yes, a story of resistance, of remembrance, and hope, is one of the stories which are told in the Roads of Yemoja in this project. And I think that it's a story that deserves to be shared with the world, as are so many other yes, African and diasporic stories that are still untold. And I'm leaning on a Nigerian scholar. I want you to listen to this bit where he talks about how the African heritage worldwide needs to be more disseminated and shared to the world. Here it is.
I mean, we spend millions of dollars every year watching Thor or what's Thanos or whatever this silly Avenger movies. This Greek mythology is celebrated around the world. Hollywood makes millions of dollars out of that because the value is the same thing. The human beings creating mythos, creating ideas, creating stories, and reinforcing them over generations to keep themselves grounded in the reality of their life, of their existence in the world. We had that. And somebody else came from abroad and said, this is not valid. And we let them convince us of that reality. It's the biggest tragedy you can ever imagine.
So according to Kola Tubosun, the biggest tragedy that we can ever imagine is to have our stories shut down and kept quiet, and the only way to be free in a way is to be able to have our voices heard. To go back to the Malaika series, I just wanted to show you this portrait to conclude. So it's a self-portrait that was taken in Dakar a few years ago. A picture that I really like because, as all photographies are, it's a chunk of an era in my life. So it symbolizes a very special time in my life, and I just wanted to compare it to the Malaika series, because as awards started to rain on the Malaika series, I was asked very often if it was self-portraits. I'm just going to go back to it. Yeah. I was often asked if Malaika was a self-portrait, if I was in the picture. I would always laugh and answer by reminding people the identity of the model, and remind them that Maria-Agnès Gomis is a prodigy dancer, and without her athletic back, she wouldn't have been able to carry the wings that are so heavy. But as I moved forward, I realized that it didn't matter if it wasn't my face on the images. It could still be me on the picture. And the picture could still speak of my personal journey. The Malaika series and its international exhibitions coincided with me finally leaving my full-time job as a reporter to become a researcher and an artist. In addition, it was also at that time that I withdrew myself from a relationship that no longer felt hospitable. So it seems that freedom has a price. As I was asked to give this lecture, I struggled to come up with a theme and a title, and breaking free and preserving freedom seemed to come naturally, probably because coincidentally, it made me think of a book that I had just read, an essay from Ghanaian author Ben Okri, an essay on literature called A Way of Being Free. But as the Cubans say, no hay casualidad, there's no coincidence. So maybe it's no coincidence that I am zooming to you to talk about freedom and the price of it in a time of unprecedented and ongoing sanitary and social crisis. Inventing new ways of breaking free through arts and culture, but also ways to move, evolve, and speak freely remain to this day one of the greatest challenges, not just for us artists, but for all. Thank you for listening. Amanda, are you here?
I am just struggling with my mouse. Thank you so much. That was amazing. We have several questions, so I'm going to just start to tackle those and save my questions, so maybe a little bit later. The first one I see, and please continue to put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, is what is the meaning of Asesu, part of the Yamoja chant? I think that was in the second chant.
Okay, Yemoja Asesu, what does it mean?
Yes.
Okay, so in Ifa spirituality and in Yoruba thinking in general, there's the belief in reincarnation. And as humans, access reincarnation, so do Orishas. And each time they come back, Orishas, each new life brings new learnings, and each new life of an Orisha is called a road. So Yemaya Asesu is one of the roads of Yemaya. It's one of her alter egos. It's one of the avatars of the deity. There's Yemaya Asesu, for example. There's Yemaya Ashagba. There's Yemaya Okute. So it's all different declinations of one same deity, different versions of her. And I like this thinking a lot because it also speaks a lot of the woman condition, that women can be workers or mothers and basically anything that they want. They can choose any way or any path that they can. So this is what Yemaya Asesu is. It's one of the ways, one of the caminos, the Yemaya, one of the avatars, and the specific chanting to Yemaya Asesu is one of the chanting that that survived time and the oppression of slavery, because as you heard it in the recording, it remained exactly the same, except for Yemoja has turned to Yemaya because of Spanish pronunciation, but the chanting, which is mostly in Yoruba, remained the same on both shores of the Atlantic. That's what I was trying to express by making you listen to the Yemaya Asesu chant.
Thank you. And that actually answers another question, which is what language or languages were the chants done in?
Yes, so in the chanting, there's Yoruba, there's Fon, it's a language from Benin, and there's also some vestiges of a language that's a little bit more ancient, that's called Aja. All African languages from the west part of the continent.
Thank you. Audrey Ship asks, your research covers a large geographical area. Is there a particular region of the world that you find is particularly rich when studying Africans on the continent and in the diaspora?
Yeah, well, as for the subject of spirituality and African tradition religion and how it disseminated and all of that, some of the places that were studied a lot were Brazil. There are a lot of documentation about Brazil, Candomblé, Ubanda, Afro-Brazilian rights, about how Yemoja is also very much alive there in Bahia and other places. Haiti is also very interesting because there's the elements of culture that were transmitted are quite homogeneous. So it's easy to connect dots with some African traditions that are mainly from Benin, because it's mainly people from the Ewe, Fon, and Aja ethnic groups that were taken in Haiti. And I show, well, there are African diasporas also in Venezuela, Puerto Rico, even in Argentina, all over the Americas. But I chose Benin and Nigeria. Well, I'm Beninese, and I'm Yoruba on my mother's side, so I wanted to stay in that region. So Benin and Nigeria seemed relevant for me. And also I chose Cuba because much less has been said and written about the Yoruba and Ewefon heritage in Afro-Cuban spirituality. Also because of the fact that the country was locked with the blocus, with the political and geopolitical situation of Cuba, people had much less of a chance to travel and go back and forth to the continent. So it was more of a closed transmission. And so that's what interested me. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, and I think actually the second part of that question, this may be a nice segue to it, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but how did the Cuban Revolution affect the practice of African spirituality in Cuba?
That's a very interesting point because, of course, as you know, God doesn't have its place. God and worship and churches, they don't have their place in socialism. And after the revolution, some of those rights were banned. And that was very interesting to see that there was a surge. So people kept at it, but in clandestinity. And there was a surge in the 80s and 90s where the regime finally kind of let people do their thing spiritually a little more. There was a surge of it. And it was interesting to me because in the Republic of Benin, there was also an attempt at a socialist regime, and in the 80s, and in the same manner, traditional religions were vilified and banned and forbidden. And then there was a surge after the socialist regime. There was a surge of endogenous practices and all of that in Benin, to the point that there is now a national day for endogenous religion in Benin. It's on January 10th. And that doesn't exist, for example, in Nigeria. They have closed days for Christians and Muslims, but they don't have an official day for endogenous religions. So it's still a bit like that. So yeah, of course, from the year 1959, the castrist revolution upset many of the rights because they were banned, but then they came back again.
So just so you know, I'm skipping over several comments that say this was a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much.
I was so nervous. I'm really glad that.
And let's see, we have a question from Suzanne Fincher. Has your exploration of culture and art resulted in a personal spiritual practice?
My own spiritual practice has evolved. I'm not initiated, but it's very interesting, all of that, because even if part of my work is about the fact that the researcher is both inside and outside, as I am. And many people told me to get initiated and that it would allow me to go further, to dig further, and to have more access. But I don't think it's really necessary. First of all, I already have a lot of knowledge about what's going on. Secondly, a lot of the things that I would do and learn during my initiation, I wouldn't be allowed to share because some of these things are secret. And but my spiritual practice has evolved. I think I feel more confident about my work and my purpose since I've started working on this project. Is it because it feels like on several occasions during this project, there were some problems. I lacked some fundings, or there were some issues with the traveling, and then there was COVID, and there were many interruptions. And but it always found ways to move forward. So it gave me a confidence about being able to complete this project, and probably about the fact that, as many people have told me in Nigeria, in Benin, and in Cuba, I don't walk alone. this idea that you walk with your ancestors and that they help you to achieve what you're supposed to be achieving, is now very much a certainty for me now at this point. But I mean, there were some interesting experiences because, for example, I met with this person who is an American, and he was initiated in Nigeria, but he lives in New Jersey. And he was telling me that what he likes about this spirituality is that it's about knowledge of self. Even when you're initiated to an Orisha, your spiritual path is supposed to help you know yourself better, manage your own character, and move towards a concept that's called Iwakpele. It means gentle character. And so this guy was telling me about all of this, and he's like, well, if you think that knowledge is power, then self-knowledge is self-empowerment. And he was telling me how this is what he had achieved as a practitioner of this religion. I don't know if it applies to all the practitioners, but I thought it was a really great way to sum up what it also meant for me in this artistic journey.
This is another kind of personal question, but it's really a lovely one from Amelia, who's teaching our museums and ethics course at the Carlos. I read this poem recently called Diaspora Blues by Nigerian poet Ijeoma Umebinyo, and it resonated deeply as an immigrant. And here's a quote from it. So here you are, too foreign for home, too foreign for here, never enough for both. End quote. How do you resonate with this concept on derootedness, having traveled so much and lived in different places?
Okay. For some time it was a struggle because of my mixed background and the fact that I traveled and lived in many places, the fact that the several languages that I live in, the several. It was at one point when I was younger, I think it was harder to navigate because I felt like I had to, it's like there was a war inside of me that I had to reconcile all of these different sides, or of these different sides of histories and all those wars that happened. But I mean, the more I grow within this artistic practice, and I mean, the more I age, I guess that I feel like for everyone, it's a moving thing. It's always under construction. Identity is not still. It's not, and a lot of Caribbean authors who have conceptualized creolization. I'm talking about Edouard Glissant, Patrick Chamoiseau. They talk a lot about how identity is rhizomatic structure, a lot like mangrove. You know, it's not straight down. It can extend horizontally, and it's always being created. So I think that today I see identity as something that's always evolving. As long as you're alive, you can still learn new languages, make territories part of yourself. And so it's really a moving thing. And also it's multi-layered, and it's okay to be able to switch codes and to have all of that inside you. It's just multi-layered, and it's okay to be really thick in that matter. It's I think the richness and density of the discourse also stems from that. So it wasn't always easy, and it's not always easy to explain to people, because I get the question, where are you from, a lot. it's not always easy, and you don't always want to explain, of course. But I mean, it's getting more and more comfortable with the years. It doesn't have to be associated with melancholy. It's more of a strength, I think. Yeah.
And I'm going to get back to AJ's question, but I feel like this one sort of is a nice follow-up from Yvonne. What helped you personally to push forward beyond your known former life to discover and create your art?
And break free. Ooh. What? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, at one point it just made sense. I mean, I wanted to have an artistic training, but my parents didn't allow it because being an artist, it's not serious. C'est pas un métier, quoi. It's not a job. It's not. So I studied journalism and political sciences and storytelling, and now I'm really glad to have that education and that baggage, because it just feeds into my artistic practice is nourished with that, including with some methods of investigation that I learned from my journalism years. But what pushed me? I mean, I became a mom while I was working. Let's say the sabbatical that I took to work on the wings, make the feathers, write the poem, prepare for the shooting of Malaika. The sabbatical that I took was some time that I took of my reporting job because I had just had a baby. And so I wanted to take some time to be home and breastfeed and everything. And I was really bored, so I started working on the Malaika Dotou Sankofa series. And then I wanted to be able to tell my daughter that nothing was impossible, that if she wants, she could be whatever she wants to be. So how better to tell her that than to show her through example that I mean, I had this dream of becoming an artist and a writer. Why not go for it? So I guess that being a mom, although it took up a lot of mental space and time and everything, it kind of fortified my, it kind of gave me mental strength to pursue some of the things that I find essential for my personal journey and for my mental health. And so I guess, and then I was lucky enough or received enough help from the ancestors to be able to pursue, like, financially and all of that. I found the fundings and all of that. And yeah, so what helped me, if I think that in that question, I sense that, or maybe I'm imagining, but maybe this is blooming artists that is asking that question to know where you find the strength to pursue and wrap up projects. You find the strength within the project itself, I think, because yeah, it's just stories that deserve to be told. And while collecting the elements to be able to tell that story is such a beautiful, fantastic human journey that, you know, it just feeds itself, I guess.
Thank you. So AJ says, you mentioned the wings were heavy. Are they held together by wire? How many feathers are attached? If you could talk about maybe the structure itself and
yes. So there's this kind of like this pad at the back, and like there's a metal structure. The skeleton of the wings is made of, it's a metallic structure. So I worked with Senegalese artisan Bassirou Wade. So yeah, actually, yeah, he made the structure. I might have some pictures somewhere there, but we made the metal structure, and then I already had. I had done quite a lot of, I'm only showing a few here, but I had made quite a lot of sketching to show how I thought that the wings could be attached to a pad on the back. And then I sewed some of the, we sewed with with wires and everything. We sewed the feathers. We looked, I examined and studied how wings of different birds work. And we mimicked it. We reproduced the movements and the structure of the wings. So long feathers at the bottom part of the wing, short feathers at the top, then feathers, then parts that could like articulate. Yeah, it was a whole thing. It was really fun to make. It was really fun to make. And how many feathers are there? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Also because there must be approximately at least, I would say, 200 to 300 feathers there. And the thing is, some would fall out. That was such a pain during the shooting, or some would fall out or, get dirty. So I would always make new ones. And even now, when I go to an exhibition with the wings, I always try to make something new. So there's always additional feathers and wax print and material at each time the wings are showcased. So it was a long job. I couldn't have done that alone, of course. So I mobilized some friends of mine to have an idea of the structure and movement and stuff. And then Bassirou Wade was really a great help. That's what he does. He works with, he makes metallic structures, and he's worked with other artists, and I really owe it to him to have such a beautiful pair of wings. He did some of the really heavy lifting with all the metal parts and stuff. So because of the metallic structure, the wings weigh approximately 20 kilograms. So it's quite a heavy thing to have on one's back. So it was important to have someone that was an athlete that could actually act like, she acts like she's carrying nothing, whereas basically it's especially this one where she's standing on one foot several times in between in between us clicking and to the shutter of the camera. She had to like stop, readjust, and then go back up those books. So yeah, it was the whole thing. It was really fun to make. And now I'm thinking of making another installation within the Yemoja project. I wanted, because I talk about, being able to return to Africa, and also the whole mythology of being able to go back in spirit and all of that. I want to make boats that fly, or boats that are like suspended, and reuse the aesthetics of the wax print feathers on those boats. I don't know, I'm working on an installation for the next Dakar Biennial. Come along and you'll see.
So Anya asks, if there's time, could Laeila talk to the intersection of the kind of research that you do and the genre of Afrofuturism?
Oh, well, there's not a lot of intersection, except that in the research that I did, I found some things on Afrofuturism Okay, so my research, this project, The Rose of Yemoja, so there's sound design, photography, literature, cartography, and also I dig deep into, you know, archives and mythologies. And there's this mythology that says that underwater, a world was created by Africans that were thrown off slave ships, that some of the pregnant women, some of the babies of pregnant women survived and then learned to breathe underwater. And there's a whole mythology around Drex, how am I going to pronounce this right? Drexia, D-R-E-X-I-A. There's even music around mythology of enslaved Africans that have built an underwater world and all of that. There's a whole trend of music that's within the Afrofuturistic movement. So I looked at all of that, and it was fascinating. But I don't feel that my work, either maybe the Malaika series or the Roads of Yemoja, I don't feel like that there's a lot of intersection with the Afrofuturist movement. I don't really see the link. It's a movement that I respect, and a lot of my artist friends are evolving within that frame, but I don't think that's my case. And about the research, it is at the intersection of several disciplines, and I found a way to try to get some academic validation for this research, for this multidisciplinary research. And I'm now, I've applied, well, I am doing a doctorate. So it's like a PhD about oral transmission around Yemoja and cultural resistance in Benin, Nigeria, and Cuba. And my restitution will be not only academic work, but also this photography, literary, and sound design artistic work that I'm doing now. So I'm doing that with the university in France, in Marseille. And so I have 2 more years to complete this research, and I'm hoping to go back to collect data and take photos and all of that, to go back to Cuba and Nigeria this year.
Congratulations, that sounds very exciting and a great way to do it. This question, I think, comes from one of our students under the guise of Paul Wolpe, but this was such an interesting lecture. And as a Cuban, I'm happy that you are trying to give voice to these religions that are so intrinsic to Cuban identity, regardless of race. Have you thought about the movement of these systems out of Cuba, since the country has had so dynamic diasporic movement since 1959? And as a side note, in Cuba, it is said that Fidel Castro took Osha in Nigeria.
Yeah, okay. So in Cuba, it is said that Fidel Castro took Osha to Nigeria. Yes, of course. Yes, I have thought of the impact of the Cuban diaspora. I met, so the project will take the form of a book. It's going to be probably like a radio documentary, but also a book with some writings, travel notes, interviews, photography, and everything. And in the book, I've met this researcher from Puerto Rico. He's a son of Yemoja, and he talks about that, about how from Cuba, some African rights ricocheted in other places in the Caribbean. And I thought it was really, really interesting, because for me, it also shows, it speaks, it goes back to the point I was trying to make earlier about culture and identity being a moving and organic thing that keeps on growing and taking directions and going, walking unsuspected paths and all of that. And so, yeah, I know that, of course, There's Cuban Santeria in the United States, in Puerto Rico. I also know that, yeah, Afro-Cuban rights have gone back to the source, and there's been some frictions because, for example, some people in Cuba, they're called the traditionalists. They refuse the syncretism that occurred between African rights and Catholicism. They want to go back to the pure practice of Yoruba religion and Ifa faith, not go through Dise Ifa, which is a book about the word of Ifa, and not go back to the, not go to all the Cuban adaptation and transculturation, and just go back to the source. So even that has caused vivid debates. I've seen some Cuban argue about that, saying that, you know, you can't erase history, and syncretism is now part of Afro-Cuban rights and going to church and all that. And I just find it really, really interesting to see how Santeria, Regla de Ocha, Regla Arara, and Regla Palomonte, so the Congo heritage, which is also very important in Cuba, how they keep on evolving as they touch base in other parts. I just find that fascinating to see that, you know, and I think that it also speaks of the nature of Vodun and Orisha faith, because it's less dogmatic than, for example, Catholicism, and yes, and so it's more, it welcomes additions way more easily than, you know, other revealed faiths. So yeah, no, I find that very interesting to see also how yeah, the Cuban diaspora has spread and disseminated the faith and transformed it. Yeah, definitely. And also how it like revigorated people at the source, because Omitonade says it very well, that she's met Nigerian people that were so impressed with what they saw abroad in the US, because there's also a lot of Lukumi, of course, in the United States. I was so impressed to see that their religion was so, yeah, praised and respected abroad, and it was such a dissonance compared to what they had learned in their own country, in Nigeria, where there's still a lot of pressure on traditional religion from Christianity and from Islam and from evangelical churches and all that. So it helps. It really helps that the diaspora is keeping this faith alive, including to rejuvenate it at the source. So I just think that this loop is really interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And our last question for today comes from Michelle Hayes. Beautiful presentation. Amazing that the chanting from Africa survived and still exists in Cuba. Are there other traditions that you found, dance, carving, that also continue?
Yeah, there's for example, there's a Yoruba tradition of beads. They use ritual beads, or they make clothing with beads, and that was transmitted. The way that the orishas are depicted, the colors that they use, the way to feed the orishas. So it's like what you use as an offering to the deity. It remained the same. Some of the within the Yoruba oral literature and worship, there's like different kinds of prayers. Oriki, Ogede, well, different prayers for different types of things that you ask for, or different times of day, and that has also crossed over. And then what I like a lot is also all some of the folk tales, some of the mythology was really appropriated by the Cubans. I mean, there are now like new chapters of Ifa religion, of Ifa faith, that were written in Cuba. For example, there are these poems. They're called patakin. Patakin means essential in the Yoruba language, and so it's like those tales or those prayers that were made by Cubans, but from Yoruba mythology. So it's like adapted, and I just find that really fascinating to see, like, how much survived, but also how much didn't survive, but was adapted, was because culture is also like a way to, it has to represent and to correspond to a certain territory and environment. I mean, so also what's in the adaptation, it's what's really interesting to me. And also, yeah. And also then there's this whole thing in Caribbean literature that's like some authors talk about this moment when the cry, the cry, the tear, the pain, the cry becomes a chant, and the chant then becomes word and tales and folk tales, and how this is all transmitted is all about resistance and survival, like I said. So yeah, no, I think it's a very interesting journey to see what people keep, what people choose or don't choose to forget, and also connect the dots of the fragmented memory. One practice that I thought I would find, but that I didn't, is in Benin, so they have this cult of ancestors that they also have in Cuba, but ancestors are represented via a small altar that's called asin. And I thought I would find that because I found some elements of rituals that resembled it, but I could never really identify. So, well, the research is ongoing, but I mean, the chanting and the word has a very specific, it's at the center of transmission, and it's at the center of culture, especially for people who, as we know, didn't have access to reading, writing, and education. So it's really within their bodies, and the music, the lullabies that they sang to their children, the chanting that they did to their deities, that they kept this cultural memory. So yeah, I just think it's really interesting because it also speaks about, you know, what makes us human, and things that don't divide us. It's just things that we can all come together and yeah, and share. I talked a whole lot.
Well, that's an absolutely sort of beautiful note to end on. So I appreciate that so much. This lecture has been recorded. It will be available on the Carlos's website later this week. You can see Malaika Dotou Sankofa, including the poem, in And I Must Scream, which will be on view at the Carlos until May 15th. We have several programs coming up, including a gallery talk with Atlanta artist Amy Esslinger on March 3rd. And later in March, Anita Uali will come to perform in the Buddhist Bug. So lots more to see. Laeila, thank you so much. This was just absolutely a wonderful way to spend our Sunday. And thank you everyone for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.